tell me your name,
Oh, yeah.
the organisation, and what your role is.
Okay. I'm Aidan Halligan. I'm chairman of the board of the London Pathway Homeless Health Initiative, and my role is as chairman of that particular board.
Perfect. Okay. So how did the organisation come about?
I'd love to say there was a clear plan and that I had a Pauline conversion at some point in my life, but it wasn't quite that way. Two things happened. A homeless person died outside our hospital about 3 or 4 years ago, and he was a 43-year-old man. He was a father of 3 daughters. I've got 3 daughters, and the hospital asked me to take a closer look at it just to see if there was anything we could learn from that particular experience. And no one had done anything wrong, but there was a sense of sadness that we couldn't have done more to help this person in a very difficult time of their life, and the fact that they seemed to be very dispossessed and alone when they died. And when I looked into it, I found that actually the homeless patients in our hospital were a very different set, and attitudes from staff varied enormously. Some were hugely and quietly compassionate, and others didn't quite understand how best to advocate for those people who really didn't have a voice. They weren't the sort of people that could put in a complaint, but actually they were the sort of people that kicked up in A&E, particularly when they sobered up, or if they were distressed by an interaction. And so they were very loud on our radar, but not always seen as particularly deserving, particularly in the context of difficult behaviours. So that was something that became apparent in a way that I could never have picked up from statistics, and touched me in a particular way, because we're a universal, comprehensive national health service, and we say that we look after the poor and most abandoned with particular concern, and I didn't see that happening. On the other hand, a colleague of mine who had seen me doing all sorts of interesting things said, why didn't I do something worthwhile? And suggested that I should buy The Big Issue, which I thought was a property speculation magazine at the time. And I got it from one of the street vendors. And as you do, you strike up a conversation, and he was a lovely fella, and he was homeless, but, you know, quite happy with it. I got to know him and several of them over the next... I used to get a copy every week, almost religiously. And as I did, I was asked by my colleague to ask the person their first name. And I'd asked the first name and got the copy and got to know them. And then after a while I saw them quite occasionally in bandages or quite bruised. They often had a dog, and you'd see them, you know, sitting down beside their dog quite comfortably in the middle of the park or on the street side. And one day I asked where they'd been treated for their injuries, and this chap said he'd been treated in UCLH, and this is where I worked. And I asked him what the care was like, and he said it's not bad, depends on who sees you. But he said the problem is once you're seen there, then you're back out in the street, and it becomes difficult, and you often go back in again and so on. But what he was saying to me was the care was very variable. He was a very clever man, so was acutely aware of people's impression of him, but actually so dispossessed in many ways that he didn't have a voice to feed in as an equal, as a patient. And so in that moment and around that time for both those issues, I thought the time had come when we should really do something about this. I had worked essentially with the government, and our strategies never really seemed to impact on the ordinary patient or the citizen in the street in the way that these people didn't seem to be getting a benefit from it. So I then knew of Nigel. Nigel had done some extraordinary work in Leicester over 18 years, quietly and unsung, but the products of it were hugely impressive. And Nigel and I met up, and, well, we took it from there, really.
Okay, brilliant. So, so you've... Okay. So you've recognised a problem.
Yeah.
So where do you go from there?
Well, we recognised the problem, and we also recognised that if the traditional, orthodox, conventional approach was to be implemented to solve it, that it probably wouldn't solve it. because it was too unyielding, too inflexible. We also needed money. We had none, and we had to raise some funds. What became clear to me was that, and I'd heard this being said in the United States around the same problem, but quite hadn't understood what it meant. But what became clear was that no humanitarian, no moral, no spiritual argument would ever be strong enough to influence the powers that be who had their fingers on the public purse, unless we wedded it to a robust and rigorous economic framework. So I asked a wonderful ex-colleague, the chief economist of the NHS, Professor Barry McCormack, if he would mind doing a scoping exercise. And Nigel and Barry McCormack built on the scoping exercise that Nigel had done in Leicester and produced an authoritative document that showed, really beyond any sensible or reasonable interrogation, that the health economics of homeless health were overwhelmingly crying out for a response that was structured and accountable. And after that, we built the homeless health team, led by Nigel, and with Trudy Boyce, who was our first homeless healthcare facilitator and an extraordinarily compassionate woman. And that team has grown to where it is today.